G'day, guys. Oops. It's about 10:30 here in Hobart. It's good to see you guys. It's about 10:30. Feedback. Better put this on. Essential things one forgets. God, I was expecting a bit more than you two guys. There's about 4 watching now, or 3. Yeah. Was hoping more people would be on at this time. I was, trying to get some of the European, maybe people in North America haven't woken up yet on the East Coast. Yeah, well, shit happens. It's hard to try and get. I was trying to get the East Coast of the US with the East Coast of Australia within a sort of time frame that it would actually work. Anyway, just to get started with a bit of an overview. Just give me a sec. Okay, so this is basically from a study out of China. So pretty much what they've been observing and all that. They provide a bit of a background, the recent cluster of pneumonia. So, that's what's really going to kill you. And pretty much this is a sort of at one of the major hospitals there. So it's a sort of a clinical type study looking at, groups. So the recent cluster of pneumonia in Wuhan, China, has caused a novel beta coronavirus, the 2019 novel coronavirus. We report the epidemiological, clinical, laboratory, and radiological characteristics and treatments and clinical outcomes of these patients. So this is sort of very recent stuff. So obviously this has been going on for a bit of time now over there. These were sort of the early sort of information. So that's a bit of a, the actual findings that they had in early January. 41 admitted hospital patients have been identified as having laboratory confirmed. So these were confirmed infections, and it sort of covers most of the infected patients were men, about 73%, so 30 out of them. But that's just, that's more or less a coincidence, since there's more men that work in some of these areas like the fish markets and stuff like that. So, and this was sort of early epidemiology that was basically identifying this disease, new type of coronavirus strain. So we'll just go down to the sort of, because we're not going to go through all these studies, because you guys want to ask questions and stuff like that, and some of the laboratory confirmed cases. And there was basically all patients had pneumonia. So that's what's going to kill you. So pneumonia is the actual problem. And so susceptible populations are more high at risk. A third of the patients were admitted in intensive care, and 6 died out of that 41 group. So it's just going to come up. 41. So as you can see, out of that first group, it wasn't a 3%, it was a 14.6% sort of death rate. So the death rate can be quite high depending on which population groups we're talking about. So let's go to some of this, because I've read this, but we need to focus on. So in the actual ward, this is the sort of profile. So they had no one under 18. There was a small group of, between 18 and 24. And usually at these younger ages, respiratory type diseases, pneumonia and stuff like that, um, you know, younger people are less vulnerable to them. They've got stronger immune systems and all that. So it's people that have got compromised immune systems, old age, healthy underlying health issues. And you can actually see between 25 and 49, this is also, you're looking at a much larger population group here compared to the other ones, because there you're looking at 15 years. Here you're looking at basically, close to 25 years. So you've got a bigger group you're actually looking. So obviously the bars are going to be higher, and you can actually see that. But in the 50 to 65, the percentage of people in intensive care in that age is not that high. So, obviously it's higher than people that are younger, but it's not as extreme. The real risk group is that 25 to 49, that sort of standard middle age, sort of young adult, middle-aged type person. So that's where anyone 25 to 49 is the actual group that seems to have the highest level of hospitalization, and also tends to also have the highest percentage or second highest percentage within out of these two groups. Has the first highest out of the three groups. It has the second. The numbers actually change very much for people over 65. That's where it's 50%, 50-50. So as you can see, that's when people are have more health issues, more underlying issues. So they tend to be far more vulnerable at that age, within that age bracket. So your grandpas, that's the sort of group that's really at high risk, because 50% end up in intensive care. So we're not talking about a small percent, half that number there. And the second biggest group is that middle, where they may have underlying issues and stuff like that. And you can actually see this sort of group would have missed out the fast food industry. So they would have grown up in a time when China had a cleaner food environment. So these people are in the last, basically, pretty much were born in a period in the last 15 odd years, or basically were young adults in the last 15 odd years. So that's a sort of group that basically, within the last 2 decades, that would have had a much more compromised diet. So these people are just vulnerable because of old age, and just, old age people tend to be more at risk for pneumonia. I mean, that's what took out my grandfather at 85. He had no other issue, got pneumonia, he was gone. His brother, 87, same thing. You're much more vulnerable at that age. And it's, even if you don't have any underlying big health issues, you just basically, especially if you've worked hard through your life and all that, and you're less than, then you've had more wear and tear. So these are the sort of issues to consider in that regard, whether you fall in that group. Obviously, within countries like, North America, Australasia, and Europe, I would suspect that you'll probably get these sort of effects in these sort of populations. These populations may not be as immune because they may be compromised in terms of dietary, in terms of just general health, as we know, we're finding, especially in countries like Australia and North America, because of the food environment being so toxic, we find much younger people with diabetes and a major health issues. Where in China, it's usually in these sort of groups, these older population groups, where those sort of characteristics exist. They haven't had the same amount of period of time where they've been exposed to these sort of foods, especially the younger sort of population, all that. So that may have an effect. As I said, this is epidemiology. this is one of the earlier studies out of China based on this, and really, how applicable it is exactly to other countries. Yeah, it's sort of hard. These sort of the figures of sort of the groups, as you can see. Men tend to be, but remember, these were the first groups, so the sort of jobs that they were involved, they were more exposed to that sort of environment. As you can see, people with underlying issues, currently smoking, it wasn't a big percentage of currently smoking people, but people that had, sort of generally tended to, especially in the, some of the groups, like diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular, but diabetes was much higher out of those groups, as you can see. So, so I would say that, and as we know, with a lot of diseases, both bacterial and pneumonia is a bacterial disease. Diabetics tend to be more prone to these type of infections and problems of that sort. So, being on a high sugar diet is probably not the best thing you could be when you're dealing with this sort of nasty virus. Yes, virus that basically then really weakens your body and allows these sort of bacteria that love sugar to grow. Now, you can actually see, in terms of temperature, fever, as you can see, fever rates pretty much close to 100%. So, so basically that is a clearly defined symptom. And we can actually see even, the actual numbers here, they're pretty high. So the other sign, coughing is a pretty high thing as well. Fatigue is a 50-50 thing. It's, so, and I suspect that underlying conditions would be, certain people would be more. So, coughing, like most other respiratory type disease, illnesses, or, like the flu and stuff like that, tend to be, when it comes to things like headaches, not that high, so even diarrhea, there's sort of is not that high. So blood pressure. Which was that? Let me just remember. That was the intensive care. So they tended to have respiratory rate. So it was slightly lower. Yep. What was the other part that I actually wanted to look at? Respiratory distress. That just goes in, the magnitude in that regard. But that's based on those other numbers. So, okay, so that was that part. So, this is sort of very recent as well, out of China, and pretty much, they've identified it as a respiratory disease. That's what's killing people. They talk about it, that it's similar to SARS but worse, or in that regard. And they studied this 41-year-old in that regard. Yes, fever, the temperature, cough, so, so basically, sort of dizziness, weaknesses, chest tightness, so those sort of things that, that basically just indicate that it's quite clearly, a strong respiratory. These are the sort of symptoms you get from respiratory type diseases. So it's basically the sort of thing. This is just going through all the testings and stuff like that. There wasn't. That was about it. I don't think there was anything else on that. This is basically looking at sort of MERS, SARS, and other coronaviruses as causes of pneumonia. So basically these, pretty much a relationship between pneumonia and these are quite clear. Now, obviously, it's going to be because you guys are at the moment, you're just coming out of winter and all that. So you're actually far more vulnerable. Your vitamin D levels are low in that regard, and so you tend to be at greater risk for these type of pneumonia type issues. I'm not going to go through that. That was the Hong Kong SARS one. Nope. And this one was the epidemiological clinical trial. That was the other one out of China. When was this hit Lancet in this year? Okay, yep. That was the other one with 99 patients. Trying to remember which hospital that was. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so again, even this study actually, similar fever, cough, shortness of breath wasn't a big one, all these other things, even diarrhea. The other one was 3%. This one was 2%, nausea, vomiting. So it's, these aren't. So more than one sign or symptom, which is basically fever, cough, shortness of breath, about 15%. But one of those signs is about 90%. So really it's these two, a fever and a cough, which is sort of classical, respiratory type illness. That's what most people get. They don't really get most of this other sort of, the sort of sore throats or mucus in your nose and stuff like that, or things like that. So you're not gonna get these sort of things anyway. So as you can see, chest X-rays, 75% pneumonia. So it literally, when it comes to it, like, not everybody succumbs to pneumonia, but that's a high percentage. We looked at those other groups that ended up in critical care. Not everyone with pneumonia will end up within critical care, but pneumonia is a real nasty sort of state. I mean, even young people can get killed from pneumonia. It's not something that, to take lightly. And it, from all the chest X-rays, they actually show this very high level, which is a very big concern. That not only is it, we looked at the other group, and a lot of the actual bad symptoms, and the death rate of that first group was, over 14%, nearly 15%. That's bloody high. Even the Spanish influenza was, down to about, around the 2 to 3%. So these are the early things. Now, obviously, as a virus adapts to the hosts and all that, you don't want to kill a host too fast, so it becomes slightly weaker sometimes. So that percentage could be coming down as the death rate, because if you kill too many hosts too fast, well, you're not going to spread as a virus, as a successful virus. So it's a catch-22 for a virus. You know, do I knock off these people too fast and don't spread, or do I basically, you know, keep them alive for longer? So it sort of has to temper itself in that. So, you know, this was the focus. So obviously with a vulnerable body, you know, the major thing is, you know, antibiotic type, you know, these are the sort of the frontline sort of approaches to pneumonia and stuff like that. With some people, you know, they will, depending on their diet and a whole lot of things, like you may have, you know, a major fungal infection as well, you know. So, and, you know, I suspect a lot of the vegetarians will end up with both these, not one, but both, especially on their diet, unfortunately for them. So let me just switch away for a sec. Okay, get that out of the way. We'll go back to that other stuff. And I think I just quickly, I think I showed you guys this one last time about how L-carnitine is really good for, you know, for viruses and stuff like that. So it is a good supplement. You know, if I was actually, you know, I've actually bought some, because generally I get it for my meat and all that. Even today I had a nice steak this evening. But at the end of the day, you know, upping your levels slightly may be a good idea. And, you know, but the key one when it comes to respiratory type diseases, key thing is your vitamin D status. That is critical, you know. Your vitamin D status. Remember, I think I've mentioned this on a number of occasions. When you basically get a virus attack in your lungs, and you know, a virus attack that potentially can compromise your lung functioning and all that, you know, and when you basically get some oxidative stress in that sort of environment, what you do is you upregulate the collagen degrading enzymes, those matrix metalloproteinases. So you want them a bit under control. You don't want them, you know, playing havoc with your lungs, okay? Because when you're in a weakened state, you need lungs that actually are functioning well, because they become more vulnerable to, you know, the bacterial infection, the pneumonia. So that's critical that, you know, we arrest that. Vitamin D is very important for that, because not only does it regulate, you know, I mean, you've probably heard me say about 1,000 types of enzymatic processes, but it regulates these collagen degrading enzymes to basically function properly and keep those lungs in a good state. Plus, you know, your T cells, you know, your immune system, you basically need vitamin D to basically, they've got, you know, actual vitamin D receptors on them. But at the same time, you need selenium. I mean, I've supplemented for years to some extent with selenium until I sort of got into liver and eggs as my source of selenium, as my primary source of selenium. So, and that's a very important thing for your immune function as well. So consider adding more eggs. You need more cholesterol, because, you know, in order for the immune system to work, you know, you basically need more cholesterol, you know, in a highly, in an environment where you've got a lot of oxidative stress and a lot of, you know, pathology, and, you know, you need to up your cholesterol. So eat more eggs. So, you know, your strategy should be basically carnitine supplement, vitamin D supplementation up to 10,000 IU, you know, especially you guys in the Northern Hemisphere at the moment. You should be doing that. In the Southern Hemisphere, if you're getting some sun and all that, you know, probably about 2 to 5 depending, 10 if you're indoors and you're playing computer games all day. Obviously, you're not getting enough sun. If you're an office worker like I am and not getting enough sun, you may have to go to about 5,000 IUs, get your levels up, because you will need that. The moment basically that virus hits you, your T cells will require vitamin D. And if it's not available, you're not going to be performing at full, at full capacity. So you need to do that. And it's really important that you basically focus on those sort of things. Anyway, now there was one more. No, it was the other one. Let me just give me a sec, guys. And then shortly, because I've nearly going now for half an hour, I'm trying to keep this to half an hour and then start answering some of your questions. So this is just a general overview, talk about some of the stuff, and then what you need to do. And then basically let's get into the, hot questions of, things you can do, some practical things and stuff like that. Wrong folder. God almighty. Need to stop moving these things around into the different folders. Okay. So this is basically a Japanese study on basically pneumonia and vitamin D, and they basically look at different cell lines and all that. I'm not going to basically sit around and read it. If somebody wants to read it and all that, their basic conclusions experimental using cell lines and a mouse model engaging vitamin D activated in the lungs, and the dietary intake of D might prevent and suppress the sort of fibrosis that usually happens. Taking vitamin D is a useful prevention treatment of various diseases in the lungs. So the problem is, we just can't experiment on humans. That's the problem. So we use cell lines and all these sort of things to basically look at these things, which is not as I call it, it's the 1930s syndrome, because the Nazis basically experiment on people. But the thing is, they ignore that all the other sort of information prior to that. This is another study. This is an epidemiological study. So they've actually observed in communities which are deficient in vitamin D that basically they're more prone to pneumonia, especially older people. So I'm not going to read it out. If somebody wants it, that's the title. Go and read it yourself in that regard. So I've got 3 more minutes before I have to start answering questions. Now, just quickly. So the sort of things you want. Now, just go back. This is our BS. This is in our work environment. This is the Tasmanian Department of Health. So they've basically put out these sheets about how to stop the spread. So, don't cough all over the place and infect other people potentially. Wash your hands with soap and water, and profusely. They provide information on that basically should be rubbing for about 15 to 20 seconds, they've actually even got some sort of PC piece of shit, happy birthday song slowly. So sing. Anyway, they come up with some shit sometimes. But anyway, if it helps you to basically do the 15 to 20 seconds, stuff like that. So really, your focus is some prevention, and that's basically if you, try to minimize. The reality is it's really hard, because if you have to think, all your mucosal sort of membranes, all those areas are your eyes, your nose, your mouth, your ears, your anus, you know, your genitalia. All these areas are where mucosa is actually produced within your gut as well to protect the body from anything going into the bloodstream. But the reality is, you can only do so much, in an environment. If you really want, you'd have to get into a hazmat suit. Let's be honest. That's not going to happen, especially in my work environment. So these are sort of things about washing your hands before touching face, especially lips, mouth, and nose. You need to avoid food and drinks, after coughing and sneezing, going to the toilet. It's just wash, so you're going to become, a bit manic in that regard. But, if you want to basically reduce your risk threshold, you don't really have a lot of other options. Keep your distance, a meter. A large step for people who are coughing or sneezing. So basically, get the fuck away from them. That's what they've been. So really, you really have to try to minimize your exposure. The reality is there are limited things you can do. Really, there are very limited things you can do. As I say, get your vitamin D status up. Get your carnitine, get your fat-soluble vitamins. Remember, all the other fat-soluble vitamins all play a role in collagen-degrading enzymes, so they all help. Retinol as well helps in the lungs as well. It's not only vitamin D. So you need all this. You need to basically up your fat-soluble vitamins slightly through animal sources. Eat more bloody fat, tallow and stuff like that. And pretty much that is a quick overview of what's, some of the studies are showing in China, the susceptible groups, and, some of the underlying issues that make you more vulnerable to these type of corona type viruses. And also that, it's worrying that the numbers for those, the amount of deaths in that first group was so high. Usually when a new virus emerges, it usually is a slightly bigger killer. It's a bit like Ebola, and then it's sort of the Ebola death rates have sort of come down. So it's starting to adapt to our physiology and not trying to kill us off as fast, so it can actually spread. And that's why it was a bit more successful the second time around. It was able to get a bit more legs. And so it may not be as lethal as the 14%, but, even if it's bloody half, that's 7.5, that's, or 7, that's nearly double or double or triple, depending on whose data you're talking about compared to the Spanish influenza. So it could kill a lot of people, so it's going to be, let's say, it will lower the population of the earth if it really gets out of control. So that is basically it, guys. Let me just go through. Yes, Vader was first. Good on you, mate. And what does Wayne say? And it had been noticed that, yeah, exactly. Young people do not, well, they do contract, but what they don't do is they've got usually their sort of their lung health is much better. As you get older, you smoke, inappropriate diets, everything, you start basically doing more damage than repair over time. And so you become more vulnerable over time. And that's why these sort of, diseases which are respiratory type usually strike people that are basically less healthy and older primarily. But less healthy can also be younger people or people that have prematurely aged on an inappropriate diet, like a lot of the veg tarts. We see them all the time, like vegan deterioration actually parades them and many others, how they're deteriorating and falling apart. So keep that in mind. Okay, Luke's actually asking, could heat exposure help heal a viral infection? This is basically, it's the problem here is that it compromises the body so fast that, really, and it really sort of allows pneumonia type, because there's a large proportion of the population that do have the actual bacterium of pneumonia in there. I mean, I have it because my father has it, and he's been, you can get a vaccination for pneumonia, but it usually is given to people over the age of 65. So what you could do is basically just go and do it and pay for it. That's an option, It's an option that I'm thinking about as well. I'm trying to work out how to get it, basically in this country, and sort of convince my GP to give it to me. So yeah, we're still working on that one. So yeah, so that's still a question mark there. Good to see you, mate. I might as well ask you if you're still here. Do you want to be on the Sunday live stream? Are you free? Let me know. Any other questions, guys? God, with death at your doornail, I'd be expecting you guys to basically be clamoring to basically ask more questions. Okay. Hi. Would fasting be beneficial in this case? I plan to do a 72-hour fast. Look, fasting can actually, if you're, let me put it this way. It's always a good thing to do a long fast like that to basically sort of reset your immune system and boost it a bit. It's not a bad idea. It's a good strategy. The last thing you want, if you basically get any coughs, cold or whatever, stop the fast. Just stop it. You really need to also focus on those two things, the carnitine and especially the vitamin D3. That's, you've got to, you're in winter sort of environment. You're just coming out of winter, 10,000 IUs in that regard every day. And don't forget to basically, because you're also going to be pulling in calcium, which is an issue in itself. So you'll be pulling in more calcium, so make sure that you've got enough retinol to balance out the vitamin D, one thing. So, obviously, and also have some dairy or brie for the MK4. That's also important as well. And also it balances out and sorts out the calcium side of things, because you still need to suppress viruses. You still need the utilization of calcium. And the other thing that is important in the regulation of that is MK4. So you could buy a supplement, which is what I use currently. So I haven't been using it I've just been using brie and liver and eggs and getting my MK4 but I actually have ordered a higher dose due to this sort of corona shit. So yeah, I've had to make, sometimes you just have to change your strategy. You sometimes have to move in that direction, so to speak. But yeah, sort of, get your fat soluble vitamins up. That's critical in this sort of environment. So, and even vitamin E, that plays a role as well. But, try and get it from the diet. Don't, if you're going to get it, use the Jarrow low dose, which comes from palm oil, which is safe. It's a safe oil source. And that's, you can find on iHerb and places like that. It's about 19 milligrams. So it's basically a low dose, which is what you want. You don't want to unbalance the other fatty acids, the other fat soluble vitamins. So that's really important to keep that in mind. Have you got access to if you can, because shoot, give me a sec. Don't do that to me now. Okay. So this is the one that I get. So you've probably seen all my other ones. Bulk nutrition. It's a Tasmanian company, and it does pharmaceutical grade. There's no shit. There's no fillers. There's no nothing. It's just pure, carnitine or pure whatever. So that's what I get. If you can find 100% pure pharmaceutical grade, clean like this, that's what you want to get. So I don't like using any stuff because there's a lot of shit out there with a lot of fillers and stuff like that. You want to avoid all that crap. So I stick to clean stuff. Yeah, it tastes like shit, but you can put it in. I usually put it in my milk. So my raw milk, I'll just throw it in, stir it, and drink it. That's how I drink it. So that's my approach. Okay. From the what? From the vaccinations? Don't be silly. Vaccinations have saved millions and millions of people. Yes, they do have side effects in some people. Very, very minimal, nothing major. But basically, vaccinations, sanitation, and antibiotics have saved millions and millions of people. Before that, the communicable diseases, go back and look at the history, tuberculosis, typhoid, absolute killers, polio, you guys are basically living in the modern 21st century where none of this exists. It's only your shit diet that's actually causing you health problems, and you have never seen communicable diseases rampant through a population. Go back and see some of the information, and you'll be horrified. Yes, they're not perfect. Some people have got susceptibility to basically like eggs because they're actually the unlive virus is sort of produced in that sort of egg to get an immune response. And I always remind people, because people give me the shits about vaccinations. You look at the North American Plain Indians and the Aborigines in Australia, they were never exposed to these viruses. When they got exposed to these viruses, they were killed 90% because their immune system had no knowledge of that virus and how to deal with it. Now, vaccinations are not perfect, and they don't basically cover you because it's the previous year. But what they do is they provide enough information to the immune system to know, because a virus may mutate and change, but by the next year, there's still some of the actual protein structures and protein components are still the same. So the immune system goes, I know that. It may not know how to successfully immediately eliminate it or deal with it. It may get a bit of a foothold, but eventually can handle it and actually take it out. But if you're basically not vaccinating and then a decade later something nasty comes along, it will kill you because you don't have any immunity, any residual, even knowledge. Your immune system is basically, blank. I don't know this. This is new. It just takes you out. That's what happened to the North American Plain Indians. That's what happened to Europeans when a number of diseases came in from Asia. So you want to take the risk, go right ahead. Not me. I love the modern world. I wouldn't want to live back in the times when people had, bubonic plague and all sorts of bloody things and leprosy and literally locked away. And oh God, what a horrendous life those people lived. Just know people that get vax and get some things that they get the vax for. Nobody's died from vaccinations. And even when the Japanese were basically thinking that they basically were all going to basically get autism, that didn't happen. It's genetic, as even, it's just nonsense. The Japanese, basically, it was a period where a lot of them actually, because they're fanatical like that, they're sort of black and white, their world, and they literally basically stopped vaccinating in mass, large amounts. Autism rates still kept on going up because the underlying issues had not gone away in terms of diet and exposure to westernized diet that they exposed themselves 2 decades ago. So did a whole lot of other diseases. So that's the reality. All the rest is BS. Now, obviously, sanitation could be done better rather than basically me having to up my iodine to prevent fluoride from causing me some issues. Obviously, it kills off the pathogens, but they could bloody. This is where we as a community need to go out and say, look, why don't we start using UVC, which is damaging to the membranes of these pathogens and all that. And it's safer. It keeps the water clean, but at the same time doesn't add all these other chemicals that basically have some dysregulation or where we have to appropriately supplement or whatever. It's all down to cost. It's like bromide that they put in basically flour rather than basically salt that they used to and stuff like that. It's a lot of that sort of shit, or due to profit and convenience and whatever else. So that's where some of those issues, but that's a side issue compared to the death rate you get from communicable diseases. Well, it's horses for courses. I think we're living in the best time in history. Technology, ease. It's not guaranteed that you'd be a rich Roman citizen. You could be a slave or a very impoverished one that had to work very hard to survive. So, yes, it sounds romantic, but yes. Any more questions, guys, about the actual coronavirus and some strategies to, things that I may have not mentioned and stuff like that, that you guys are interested in? Particular sort of things, things that may be concerning you in terms of, the sort of risks. I think this virus is quite risky. And if you can convince your doctor to actually get the vaccine for pneumonia, you should try and get it. I'm trying to work on that strategy because that's the biggest vulnerability. So in terms of the sort of death rate, now you can actually see how. Let me just bring this up. This is in the Wall Street Journal. Give me a sec. So the Japanese, this is how far the Japanese are prepared to go. even put it endangering some of their population. Like if people remember, have memory about thalidomide, back, which was basically a drug used for nausea and stuff like that women were given while they were pregnant, and a lot of people basically were really harmed. Exactly, very true. And pretty much in terms of this is the desperation, and I can see that, especially with Olympic Games, and they've invested billions of dollars, and these are sort of issues for a lot of them. Yeah, so it's not a pretty picture. Actually, there's a drug in the US which is under clinical trial. I'm trying to find out more about it. I may discuss. I forgot to actually. I had the information and I left it on my memory stick at work. Can you believe that? So yeah, I'm a bit peeved off with myself because I had downloaded the actual study in Nature, because I've got access to some of this sort of stuff. That's how I get the studies. And what did I do? I forgot it. So I can't remember the link. That's the problem. So there are two. One has actually gone through phase 1, and it actually has shown really good results. So it's a drug. It's not a vaccine. But that was in a very small group, which was very critical. So I don't know what sort of side effects it has and all that. Yeah, that sounds like one of them. It was actually a different name. That's the other one. It wasn't the one that, not really, I mean, uric acid plays a bigger role. I mean, in that regard, I'd basically, I think I mentioned earlier, selenium, because selenium is critical to glutathione. So if you don't have selenium, basically you don't have glutathione. It's one of those critical components that basically, as I said, I used to supplement years ago. Now I don't. I just eat liver and eggs and stuff like that. That's where I get my selenium primarily. But I am contemplating, let me put it this way, but you don't want to have too high, so you don't want to go over 500 micrograms, so you don't want to go, the little m, like the Greek M or mcg in English. So you don't want to go below that sort of level, above that sort of level. It also has anti-cancer. I mean, there was 2 studies back in mid about 2005 that actually showed 250 micrograms of selenium will basically push a number of people, a large group, 70 odd 46% was in the Polish study and 40 odd percent in the American study, but that was 200 micrograms and the other one was 250 in the Polish. So it's quite a potent thing. It can, have a suppressive effect on cancer. It's not, a lightweight, but the way it does it is, it's not that directly it affects. What it does is it improves the glutathione side of things. So it's critical. So as I said, just get more eggs into you, more eggs, some liver, things like that. Really important to get selenium up. You can get it through seafood and crustaceans. There are a number of, just go to the, go and look at, the sources, food sources. These are really important for glutathione, so, vitamin C, God almighty, not going to do anything against it, pneumonia and a virus. It's a piss poor electron donor. It's a piss poor electron donor in that regard. When we're having severe damage from any of these ailments, where you've got like decimation, yeah, you really need repair mechanisms that can actually kick into place to really do something about it. So focus on things like upregulating your glutathione, focus on things like your vitamin D status. Critical, guys, absolutely fucking critical. I can't stress how much. I mean, when it comes to lung health, vitamin D is right up here, with glutathione. So those are your two most important. Remember, 10,000, but make sure, because a lot of people are not, won't get enough. You don't want to dysregulate, because you don't know when the virus is going to hit you. You want to have enough vitamin D to provide that vitamin D to your T cell receptors, which are literally coated in vitamin D receptors. So your T cells, when they actually need to be able to fight, but at the same time, it's really critical that you basically, focus on, because if you'll be getting a lot of calcium into the system, so you need to have sufficient MK4 in the system, and that's why I would consider supplementing MK4 in that regard. So I eat liver once a week, and I usually have anywhere between 4 and 8 eggs a day. Most of the times I run about 4 to 5 most of the time, for choline, because I've got a SNP, a genetic problem with choline synthesis, and also I can't actually convert choline to folate, so which is another issue in itself. Most people can, I can't, so it's another issue that I've got. But obviously it helps in some of these areas as well. Only a couple of more weeks until the sun starts giving a small amount of vitamin D here. Yep. Well, that is your best source, and most of us that are on a animal-based diet, we're very heavy into into basically the sort of those fat soluble vitamins, the cholesterol, and really the cholesterol is critical. I mean, people need to remember, just because you're taking a vitamin D supplement, it's not going to work if you don't have enough cholesterol in the system, and sulfur, because remember, your cholesterol sulfur that actually is created in the actual in your skin, so some level of sulfonation is required. Now obviously we get a lot of animal products are high in sulfur, like eggs. That's why they smell. They've got that smell. Obviously red meat, methionine, and many of the others. So in that regard, we're more covered than others. Obviously the vegetarian or vegan diet, you'd be looking at things like onions, and garlic and stuff like that as your sulfur sources. So it's pretty, if you focus on that, people on a standard diet, they're not getting any of this. They eat crap out of the supermarket, which is sulfur poor, and these people are at much higher risk than the rest of us. So so keep that in mind. It's really critical and all that. And all my followers in the Australasian area, I hope you've got your blue blocking glasses on, for protect your melanopsin receptors, to basically so you don't cause yourself, because melatonin is also important. So sleep and melatonin is also protective. So if you've got low melatonin and your circadian rhythms are out of whack, you're more vulnerable as well. So keep that in mind. So I won't go into the studies now, because we've seen plenty of stuff. But really important to if you can get more sun, and if you can get better quality sleep. Also de-stressing, some of the yoga type, deep breathing exercises, really important. Make sure you're getting enough, salt in your diet, because, that suppresses cortisol. to some extent. You want cortisol only when it's required in that regard. That's the other thing we're coming back to. Obviously, some of the anti-inflammatory pathways and inflammatory pathways require arachidonic acid. So let's not forget our dear friend, the essential fatty acid, arachidonic acid. Which is higher in eggs, another reason to eat eggs, and also trying to get a bit of fish into, so we can get the omega-3 as well into our diet, not skinless with the skin on. Remember, we need the astaxanthin, which is in the skin, to basically keep those omega-3 fatty acids in a healthy state so they can be refreshed and kept, those triple bonds are not in any way oxidized and damaged and stuff like that. So keep that in mind. This sort of skinless shit, let alone, you're throwing away collagen as well, So keep that in mind. Any other questions, guys? Prevention strategies or things that you may have heard or whatever. Okay, would you recommend staying away from your tap water during these times? No, I wouldn't. There's no reason. Actually, if you've got access to like spring water or mountain water, even better, because mountain water is also lower in deuterium. So it's lower in the sort of stuff that can damage your mitochondria. So yes, I know Luke's going to say something about the nanomotors, and so yes. So that regard, it's really important that we maintain good health. So it's more depleted, but the best way to hydrate is basically fat. As I've said, fat basically produces more metabolic water and sugar produces less. So sugar, 0.44 from 1 gram, and fat, 1.1, 10% more than you put in. So I know what your mitochondria love, and it's fat. So it's not sugar. Sugar dehydrates you. Fat hydrates you, so you don't feel as thirsty. You should only drink to thirst, and you should balance that out with sufficient fat in your diet. Now, what's Luke's asking, Harry? Do you think flu-like diseases are such a big deal because modern humans are notoriously suboptimal? No, look, we look back in history, the decimation of disease or flu-like, like the Spanish influenza and bubonic plague and all sorts of things that have come across. They actually killed far bigger numbers of people as a proportion, as a percentage, of the population. So in terms of percentages, I mean, Black Death, what it do, wipe out nearly half of Europe. We've never had such killers. Even the Spanish influenza wasn't as such a big killer. As I said, all these sort of modern, approaches to communicable diseases, sanitation, vaccinations, antibiotics, even though we misuse antibiotics, unfortunately, we're creating too much resistance they should be banned. They shouldn't be used in livestock, for growth factors, and they shouldn't be, for a lot of things, they should be banned and all that, and they should be better regulated. This is where we're getting a lot of resistance and putting ourselves at risk, on health issues, even if you're a libertarian on health issues, even they would agree that basically there should be regulation, because otherwise you get misuse. Otherwise you end up like, in parts of the third world where anything goes, and that's where most resistance happens, because things are completely under control and unregulated, and people just don't use the dosages properly and all sorts of things. So I wouldn't say, what I'm saying is what is happening. We've basically dropped the ball, so to speak. We've basically said, well, okay, we're not going to use taxpayers' money anymore to basically develop antibiotics, antivirals, and stuff like that. We'll just leave it to industry. And industry just said, well, there's no profit in that, so they gave up on it. Because if you cure somebody immediately, you're not going to make a profit. So you basically say, well, I'm not going to waste my time doing that. So what happens is nobody was doing the research. And so what happened is you got resistance, you got basically suboptimal antivirals and stuff like that. And what we've done is, we had a long period where we really hammered these diseases, and now they're coming back because we've dropped the ball. We even wiped some out completely, from existence. So, but we've dropped the ball, and that is why a lot of them are coming back. And it's because we've put, there's more profit in basically giving somebody a statin or giving somebody, a blood pressure tablet or whatever, and dealing with chronic disease, because you've got, you've got a customer there that's hooked, for good, for life, nearly, where, an antibiotic and, an antiviral, you cure the person, they don't come back, they're not a repeat customer, and that's the problem. That's where governments need to basically do basic research and all that, because industry is not going to do it. There's no money in it for them, and if I was basically a businessman, I wouldn't do it. I don't blame them. I blame the government that's not investing in those sort of areas when we bloody pay our taxes. They basically use it to basically support their own little pet things and support their own mates, than rather than actually investing in our health, in basically going after some of these communicable diseases. That's where I get pissed off, misuse of public funds by these wankers, in most countries. We're not going into politics. Sorry for sort of sidestepping. Let's focus on strategies and the illness. But yeah, her ketogenic diets help, and many people on ketogenic diets don't get the flu. Wrong. Look, a carnivore and keto diet and low carb diet tend to be slightly more protective, in the sense that when you're in that sort of state, you tend to basically upregulate AMPK and also upregulate glutathione. So naturally, a ketogenic, carnivore, low-carb diet tend to basically upregulate glutathione, where a high carbohydrate diet does the opposite. So, and also intracellular antioxidants and repair mechanisms are upregulated in that sort of state, and that's the difference, between. So yes, they are more protective in that regard, but they're not a silver bullet. So yes, it is far better to be on such a diet than to be on a high carb diet. That's definite. You're going to get, people that are going to get knocked off. They're going to be people that are on high carb diets with underlying health issues of some degree or whatever. So, yeah, good point. By the way, it's so early in the East Coast in the US. I'm sure you would have had more people. Look, I was trying to cater for North America right through to Australasia, because here it's 11:30 at night. That's why I'm wearing my blue blocking glasses. It's quite later, and I was just trying to get most people within that whole area, that whole part of the world. It's really hard in that regard. I mean, because there's going to be more questions. People are going to see this, and they're going to be asking more questions on the Sunday, where there's going to be more North American people on. So they will get it. They will have seen this, and they'll have an opportunity to ask me more questions on the general Q&A on the Sunday, or Saturday for North America, Sunday for Australasia. So there'll be an opportunity there. Also on Monday, I'll be chatting with Bart as well. So he's going to be doing a premiere, and I'll be on that as well. So we're going to be going after Goji man. So yeah, it'll be an interesting theme anyway. So we'll be sorting him out as well. Spider-Man acid. I mean, arachidonic acid. Yep. You know, like a lot of people don't realize that how important arachidonic acid is. And, you know, I mean, I think I mentioned last time, you know, about the melanopsin, you know, when you get the blue light and all that, and you get that sort of the effect of being exposed to too much blue light, and you basically literally dump omega-6, arachidonic acid and DHA, you know, so it's not a good thing in that regard, you know. Arachidonic acid has been wrongly demonized. It's like, you know, it's all the associations, TMAO, arachidonic, you know, LDL, you know, you name it, they've associated it. You know, it's just basically another associational piece of shit information. And I basically, when it comes to omega 6s and 3s, the ratios, nonsense. I think it's nonsense, actually. I know a lot of people would disagree with me and argue against what I say, but I go, well, hold on. The populations that consume the highest level of arachidonic acid, which is an omega-6, Okinawans, we start pork in the morning and we finish pork at night. Sardinians, pork. My great-grandfather lived on lard because even my father used to help his mother, you know, with actually larding every year because he was the older son. You know, so he would help his mother with larding. So, you know, these mountain people that live to a long age, that's what they cooked their food in. So that's a high arachidonic acid, omega-6 type thing, fat. Is that the problem? It's really the plant-based ones, LA and ALA, and the conversion issues. That's where the problem lies. You know, arachidonic acid does not compete with DHA. You get DHA, it goes where it needs to go. You get arachidonic acid, it goes where it needs to go. You know, it's not an issue. And any excess, the body will burn off. Can't burn, you know, it's very difficult to burn DHA, but, you know, it can burn any excess like any other fatty acid. So it's a non-issue. It's an issue for people on SAD diets, vegetarian diets and stuff like that. Plus, if you're on seed oils and crap like that, it actually impedes conversion to arachidonic acid. Remember, that third of your brain that's made of PUFA, more than half of it is arachidonic acid, and less than half is DHA. So what do you think is more important out of the two in your brain? So it's just fucking nonsense continuously, you know, about all these things. It's just one after the other. It's like, you know, LP-A or LPS. Yeah, I will touch on that as well at some stage. Really important because it does have an effect on the electrical state. Has, you know, and it's been demonized by a lot of the veg-tards. They don't understand anything. They're just fucking ignorant idiots. They just give me the shits. Yep. Do you recommend doing cold exposure like ice baths and cold showers? Walking out when it does strengthen you. It's a hormetic effect. So you'll basically will upregulate glutathione and all that. But if you basically succumb to an illness, the last thing you want to do is put more stress on your body. That's when you want to basically get in bed, pull the blanket up, curl and relax and try and get some rest. Because rest will allow your body to fight back. You know, you'll be getting plenty of hormesis from the virus and, you know, all the other attacks that are happening from pathogens in your body. You don't need any more. But as prior to any illness, doing those sort of strategies are very helpful. They do basically sensitize your system and improve its response. That's what a hormetic stress does. It strengthens you. But you want to minimize hormetic stresses when you are sick. You want rest. You want to help your body sort of heal and give it the appropriate nutrition, in that regard. Any other questions, guys? Please like and subscribe if you haven't. Sort of gives me a reason to be on here. Ketogenic antiviral. No. People on it say that they don't get the... No. Look, what it does is, as I said before, glutathione is when you're in a low carb, ketogenic, whatever, you get intracellular antioxidants that go up. You also get, uric acid plays a more important role. It's actually a far more potent antioxidant than what vitamin C is. And also glutathione is upregulated. So, and that's really sort of like the master antioxidant in your body. So and the intracellular mechanisms, because when AMPK goes up, intracellular mechanisms for repair also go up. So that's really, it's a consequence of basically of having less damaging effects. The reality is, sugar causes far more reactive oxygen species in the mitochondria, where fat doesn't. It still does, but not as much. All oxidation, or basically when you oxidize anything, you basically will create byproducts. It's inevitable. Obviously, most of it gets you breathe out CO2, which is most, but primarily what your body is doing is it's taking food, stripping off those carbons and using them, as building blocks, in a sense, and then basically taking most of the protons, or your protons and your electrons, and basically using them to basically for the for your energy production. In your the electron chain, you've heard of that, and sort of through the complexes you push the proteins. There's a protein gradients that determines, the sort of the efficiency and the performance. Anyway, I'm not going to go into mitochondrial or biophysics at this stage, but so basically, yes, those are far better diets to be on. You don't want to be on a high sugar diet, definitely not. I've been trying to get my family away from seed oils, margarine. It's the worst. If I had a glass, I've got a glass of water here, but if I had a glass basically of, let's say this was a glass of seed oil, and I had an equivalent glass right next to me of sugar, I'd down the sugar, not the seed oil. That's how bad it is. And in terms of mitochondrial health, because if you can't generate enough energy, remember, as people get older, they become really decrepit, less energy, more damage to your mitochondria, less, so, and remember the level of neutrons, which is what, deuterium, it's a different isotope of hydrogen, which has got basically in the nucleus, it's got an extra neutron. That neutron basically, if you exceed a certain threshold, you basically end up getting more of those going through your nanomotors, the little, your complex fibers, it's called in biophysics, in biochemistry. And what happens is those machines start getting damaged. They slow down, but then they also can be damaged. And if they get too much damage, then your mitochondria are fucked, and then you got problems. And really, seed oils are like double that of most sugars. So they put a lot of neutrons in. And unfortunately, most people now, because of all the fast food, all the packaged food and all that, they're getting something like 50% of their diets coming from seed oils. It's just no wonder cancer rates are going through the roof, because if you actually lower cellular respiration, you can't basically produce energy through basically creating, because your mitochondria actually create metabolic water. They will take that, they'll take the hydrogen and combine it with the oxygen that's come in and pretty much produce metabolic water. That's how you hydrate, and the best is basically because it's got more, you get more ATP from fat than from sugar. You're able to also not only generate more energy, but also more metabolic water. So, I don't want to go too complex into that sort of stuff at the moment. But if you can, if you can get them off the stuff, God, you'll be doing them a great service, and possibly preventing, a large proportion of their health problems, both current and future. That stuff is just toxic, pure evil. Since it was introduced in the food supply, it's what created most of the problems. Not yet. It's not at the end, but you did arrive late. Yeah, it looks right. Good point. Well, good evening to you, because it's basically nearly 10 minutes to 12 here. Yeah, it's a bit later in that regard. You can ask it. You could, go right ahead and ask any question. I was just talking about seed oils and how bad they are, and in that regard, it's pure toxic to your mitochondria. And it's causing most diseases, cancer, that is on the rise, cardiovascular disease. If you go back from, if you ever get a chance, go to the Western A Price and look at Sally Fallon's The Oiling of America. Just Google The Oiling of America. It's not many people have seen this video. It's, unfortunately, but it actually talks about the entire industry, how it got going and how much it damaged people. Really important. And you really need your mitochondria to be in good nick when you're fighting off diseases, I can tell you. And that's why I fear for a lot of people that are on sad diets and all that. I'm not trying to frighten people, but I'm trying to say that, bloody hell, guys, if there's a time when you really need to go and just grab and shake your rellies and tell them that they need to fucking, throw that toxic shit out of their home, it may be this time. I could be wrong. It may basically mutate and become a much weaker virus and not cause so much havoc by the time it gets into North America and into Australasia for good, So we may not get the sort of big pandemic, because it was contained for a long time in China before it could get out to, and it may have actually lose its strength, because when a disease becomes contained and it can't get enough, can't move into more hosts, because remember, a lot of people don't realize is these jump between even people that were infected before and all that. And what they do is they actually signal amongst themselves. Bacteria, viruses have the ability to signal. And so they adjust to that environment. And so the Chinese, by containing it, what they've done is they will force that virus to become not as a killer as it was originally, which is a good thing. Bloody hell it is. But it still means that that there are still, we may not get the percentages like in that early Chinese study that I showed, which was over 14%. The death rate for those people that were basically those early people that were exposed to this virus. Since then, the death rate on the second study that I showed you, which was the early part of the 2020, not the latter part of last year, that actually showed a slightly lower death rate. So the virus is mutating and adapting to the environment, and it's basically becoming slightly less a killer. But how damaging it will become by the time it hits North America, Australasia, or Europe, or other parts. Well, it's already hit Europe, and even Europe. If you look at the numbers, like in Italy, they're quite high. So because there were people that were trading directly with that region, and when they got back, and some tourists and all that, so they probably had the more potent. So I don't know what's happening in Europe, but they're probably at a much higher risk than North America and Australasia, because we're likely to get the slightly less severe sort of mutation. So these strands of mutations go around the world and vary between regions. That's why they reappear, like the swine flu that reappeared in Mexico and stuff like that. Slight variation. This is the thing. They adapt to their different environments constantly, like anything else. They don't have. They're much more adaptable. Less complex organisms evolve and mutate much more rapidly. It's always really hard to predict exactly what's going to happen next. The only thing I can say is these are the precautions you're going to take, dietary, sort of supplemental and stuff like that, to respond in terms of how you deal with this. Beyond that, there's not as many options now, because I did lose my. Okay, the National Agency for Food here recommend, like in Australia, we have the same thing. New Zealand, everybody follows the USDA sort of guidelines, which is unfortunate, because all the other agencies are just too lazy to do any of their own research, and it's basically the only country that basically recommends now a much cleaner diet and stuff like that, and low carb diets, is basically Sweden. But that's where one of the doctors there was actually challenged, and she went to court, forced the government to basically do the studies. They did the studies independent, like clinical studies, and basically had to come back and testify that the results were really good. So immediately they added low carbohydrate diets to the national recommendations, which basically meant that Sweden was the first country where doctors now can recommend low carb diets without any risk to their licensing, which is great. So sometimes it takes heroic people like that to do something to sort things out. They're my heroes, those sort of people. What about MCT? Look, coconut, now, what are high in medium chain triglycerides? Obviously, coconut. Goat's milk is very high. Mother's milk. These are, but no, don't even go there. I know what some of you boys are thinking. No. And basically, they are useful because, things like lauric acid and stuff like that, they're really useful as antiviral, antimicrobial. So, it depends how much you tolerate it. I would rather encourage people basically use sort of source the stuff if they don't have issues with dairy. If they do and they want to use coconut oil, then they should consider, do they have a salicylate sensitivity? That's another issue. I know Southern Europeans don't, but I know a lot of Northern Europeans do, or origin from Northern Europe. So that's another issue in itself. So it's not an easy question. An MCT is cleaner, and probably yes, but having too much could potentially give you a bit loose stool. And, some people find that uncomfortable. If you're basically doing any blood works, your lipids will be slightly out of whack, because MCTs tend to push, in particular LDL, quite up, which is good. I actually view that as a good thing. it's one thing I'm going to remind Bart on Monday to basically the study that we looked at that I brought to his attention about a population that basically had very low LDL, very high pathogenic inflammation, from environmental, not chronic in any way, and they had brilliant cardiovascular health. So it basically, I don't subscribe to the notion of that all inflammation is bad. I think that's reductionist nonsense. So basically, look, yep, it does have some antimicrobial properties, but at the same time, how do you tolerate it? There are food sources as well, so it's not going to be the same option for everyone in that regard. Nice talk. Look, remember what I said, I think last week I actually said about, that you got most animals have the detoxification pathways of the liver and the kidneys and clear a lot of this stuff out. So it doesn't persist, yes, there's a bit, but plants will have a hell of a lot more. So even conventional stuff will be healthier than plants. It's not optimal. I get mine all, grass-fed, organic and stuff like that. That's what I focus on in that regard. I mean, even sausages, I'll get basically, organic stuff. So in that regard, I won't get, the crappy sort of stuff. But not everybody can financially, But at the end of the day, even conventional pork, its omega-6 isn't that high, and it's not a big issue. I mean, the amount of spam and stuff like that the Okinawans consume and stuff like that, I mean, God, they should really be in a bad mess. They still live longer than the Americans. So I think, the real toxins are seed oils and sugar. Seed oils, number one, sugar, number two, the refined sugars, that is. That's the real issue. All these other things are side issues. They're all association. Show me, Luke, if you can, I've challenged other people. Show me one damn study, not epidemiology, has to be clinical, that has been done over and over. That doesn't exist. And Bart knows that. Everyone knows that. It doesn't exist. So, oh, thanks, guys. I got up 200. That's not bad. I'm getting there slowly. It's happening. Will happen in my lifetime. Thanks, mate. Good to see you. I hope you enjoy. Check out some of the other stuff. I'm putting more slowly. It is slow, unfortunately. I do work. I've got a day job. I don't have and domestic responsibilities. I don't have the free time that most YouTubers have. So I sort of try and get on and do sort of live streams and stuff like that, and sort of get on with Bart K and talk a bit of science, because it's just much easier doing it that way. And he's probably one of the few people that really is genuine. He understands that. He's been an academic. He knows the sort of the pitfalls of academia, all the bullshit, the BS and stuff like that. And he's probably the only person that I sort of gravitated towards. I do, follow some other people and listen to their stuff. But, when it comes to the science, it's usually I interact quite a bit with Bart in that regard. I mean, there's a few other people. There's the Hungarians when it comes to deuterium and sort of mitochondrial respiration. I sort of focus on them. Some of the Eastern Europeans, like the Russians. I mean, deuterium research started really in sort of Hungary and Russia back in the 60s. So it's really old research. It's not new, Also, all the research about blue light and all that, melanopsin and stuff like that, that's all, Russian, and, they're way ahead of Western, because they don't have the profit thing, at the time. So they were doing basic research in these things. And this is what I said in the past. The US did basic research and then just abandoned it and said, oh, the industry can do it. But they didn't do it because there was no profit in it for them. I don't blame the industry. I blame the governments that reneged on doing that sort of stuff for us, the community who pay the damn taxes to those arseholes. I said I won't go into politics. Sometimes it's unavoidable. Nothing comes to mind. Oh, well, just view the initial stuff. Don't panic about the 14%. I do believe it's becoming less virulent. But, I'm just hoping they can keep it at bay for as long as possible, because the longer they can keep it under control, the less virulent it becomes. So that's sort of really important in that regard. Thanks, mate. Is Sweden a place that tells citizens not to consume flaxseed because it contains cyanide? I'm not sure. I don't really know whether Sweden has. They may, but I don't know in that regard. I couldn't tell you. It'd be interesting if they did. Yes. Sweden does have a lot of PC culture, which does give me the shits, but but it does have some good things. Like any country, it's got its goods and bads. I mean, I don't think any country is perfect in that regard. There are some good quality stuff, but you're going to be paying premium. That's the thing. See, that's the reason why I sort of, see, with animal fats, they're pretty. Even the PUFA component that can become in plants much more rancid. In animals, you don't process the fat. It's just on there, on the actual meat. You got the fat and you eat it. And that fat still is bound in such a way where the vitamin E is, keeping, protecting that omega, the PUFA from being oxidized or damaged. The same thing with the skin of the actual fish. It's got that red little bit. That red part is the astaxanthin. That actually both, because things like DHA, the omega-3s have 3 double bonds, not 2 double bonds so they're even more vulnerable than omega-6s in oxidizing. So, they really need that. So never consume skinless fish, basically, unless you take an astaxanthin supplement. And you shouldn't actually supplement with them because they can bioaccumulate, which is a problem. I think somebody said somewhere that that I was recommending. No, I wasn't. I just I said to somebody, look, if you're going to go into a really poor food environment for a short amount of time, like on a holiday, yes, I'd use astaxanthin for a short amount of time, 1 every 3 days, because it takes a while, depending on the person, 2 to 3 days to clear out of your system, to reduce, for your liver to clear it out. So in that regard, but that's sort of how you can protect yourself against oxidized PUFA. It's not 100%, and still some of it will get incorporated into your cell membranes, which is not very. It takes 4 to 6 years, as I've said to people, to clear out with a low dose vitamin E. Palm oil based, which is much cleaner, and it's one of the Jarrow brands. Yeah, look, I wouldn't say they are rancid, because remember, they're saturated fat primarily, so they don't oxidize. But what can happen is they can get contaminated if they're not a good product. That's the problem with coconut products, that some level of contamination that does take place. They have very little polyon PUFA to be oxidized, very little. So it's less of that problem. It's more that, the other oils are more prone to oxidation and rancidity, let alone they're over processed as well. You should never consume flaxseed oil. The moment you take a plant-based a plant and actually turn it into an oil, it basically starts becoming rancid and oxidizing. Even MUFA, even if you think about olive oil, over time it will oxidize. That's why you have to have it in a dark bottle, out of the sun and all that, to reduce the oxidation so it lasts longer. But even that, because it still has, even MUFA has one bond, so where omega-6 has 2, and then omega-3s have 3. But so there is that vulnerability to oxidation. Obviously that's where basically electron doning from antioxidants comes into play. But it's a sort of a mixed bag of, there's a lot of collateral damage, so to speak, and that sort of stuff. And if you don't have sufficient of others, too much of certain things can become pro-oxidant once they actually, I think I mentioned last time, allopulic acid is the only one which is like a super electron donor that can actually recycle all the others. So, but you only have to use something like that, supplement with something like that, if you've got a lot of underlying issues and disease and problems. You've really come from a poor diet, you've got a lot of damage, a lot of issues. I usually recommend to people, I usually sort of steer people away from most supplements and direct them primarily to food as your main source, unless you've got some underlying issue where you may need a bit more. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, look, I wouldn't, as I said earlier, loose stools with MCTs. I think I mentioned it earlier. Yeah, it's a well-known thing. There's a lot of people, because people use MCTs like for Alzheimer's and stuff like that, and dementia disease, and that's the side effect which a lot of people find, which is basically disaster in your pants. Exactly. It's usually how bad it can be. Also depends on you basically how well your stomach and your liver are actually working. So there is other factors that are at play as well. I mean, I've mentioned a bit about in some of my earlier stuff, talking about carnivore and keto diarrhea and stuff like that, and the issues with the liver and the FXR receptor and stuff like that. So I think I mentioned quite a bit of it in the previous live stream. So if people want to actually go and watch that, they'll get some information in regards to that. Let's try and Harry, can you say more about, now, not all inflammation is bad. You'll have to wait for that video. I'll have to press a button to actually release the damn thing, or find it, or we'll have to. I may have to redo it if he's lost it. I don't know exactly what the issue is. I actually, because I get all sorts of studies from different academic areas, plus my sort of area of work is also tied into Geoscience Australia. So I get information, which is geophysics and whatever other stuff. There's another part of that he hasn't released, which is a chat about the methane and all that sort of stuff. Because there was a study actually out in August last year. I had it 2 or 3 days after it got released. And we actually did around that time. And I think he may have lost the damn thing, the video. Don't know. I said, go and hound him. Go and hound Bart and say, where's the methane study? And the other one about that tribe in that you did with Harry. So with which had the high inflammation. So if you take, he knows which the ones they are, because I asked him last time and he said, "Oh, I'll find it." And, yeah, I think he's lost it. Anyway, I'm not sure exactly. I'm not giving him a hard time because I know he was going through a bit of a stressful time at that period, and so yeah, I sort of didn't make a big issue of it. I actually forgot about it until very recently when somebody sort of brought up a discussion, and I said I'd done something, and then I remembered it. Oh shit, and sort of I can't remember who actually was at the time. Yep. Cassava has cyanide also. Yep. Yeah. Look, they do actually soak it for ages and all that. It's no different than what happens with beans. My father sort of has once a week beans still, but he actually soaks them for 7 days. Why bother? I actually said to Dad, why the fuck do you bother? I said, I don't mind having some now and then. So he probably has once a month, but he has to soak them for 10 days until they become very soft and the skin can be taken off. So you take off the skin because that's where the lectins and all the actual anti-nutrients are. So you get rid of that, and then you just, you sort of cooks them with meat and all that, and sort of boils it all together. The only real healthy part there is the actual meat that he's eating with those beans, and it's carrots, beans, celery, that's the sort of stuff that he cuts in. But it's one of his treats, so I'm not going to give him a hard time about it. He has listened to me, and he's upped his meat consumption and his exercise and all that, and restored his muscle mass and improved his general muscle skeletal health at 85. So he's doing much better than he was about a decade ago when he was starting to show signs of sarcopenia. So we reverse that, nip that in the bud. Your need for inflammation to heal injuries and build muscles, for example. It's a comment. Okay, what? Yeah, I've tried cassava in Southeast Asia. Yeah, problem is it has a lot of anti-nutrients. Believe me, has a lot of anti-nutrients. It's not healthy, guys. If you're out of just curiosity, trying it, yeah, fine. But I would not. Look, most of these populations would, because it's too much of an effort. It's much easier to go and hunt an animal. It's basically, like anything, it's sort of having a bit that all populations sort of try to access. When you're in a tribal sort of stuff, everything goes because you're trying to maximize calories because, there's very limited in the environment. But when populations find more meat, access to meat, that's what they gravitate towards. That's what they maximize. That's what also the chimps maximize. And I mean, go and check the study that I went through with Bart on the chimps, how they consume up to 1 ton of meat a year. So they go out hunting and all that, and actually showed all their physiology and how it works and why and all that. And, so their muscle fibers and all that related to that, and sort of the glycolytic pathways and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I won't go. People can go and watch that video and understand the chimps, how they actually consume. Very much similar, in that regard. It's just there's a lot of BS out there, unfortunately, about a lot of this sort of stuff. And I've spoken to people who basically were at the Jane Goodard sort of centre down in Nigeria, and it's just full of vegetards, full of vegans and vegetarians that have displaced some of the other academics, and they're just doing poor science. The funny thing was, because she was she's a British academic, and for privacy reasons, I'm not going to mention her name, but she basically told me that she had left and basically criticised them the way they were manipulating the studies and all that. But they were having problems because they've got a big campaign now to try and get money to donate to basically build these earth mounds for termites, because the reality is they can't get enough animal protein, because they need a lot for those glycolytic pathways. Their physiology requires it. We switched away. We still consume it. We still require quite a substantial amount of protein, but we shifted further away from excessive protein like the chimps. We don't consume a ton a year because we've got more fat stores. They don't. So we need more fat, and we use it to basically give us more range and also the ability to go without food for a much longer period of time. So they're more restrained and restricted how much they can actually advance within an environment. So, these physiology has limitations in how a species can spread beyond certain boundaries. Thank you. Let's have the comment. What is Luke saying? People need the best sources of. Look, I would not bother with an MCT, to be honest. I just focus on, if you can handle, if you don't have a salicylate sensitivity, use coconut. As a carnivore, I focus on dairy. I have lactose persistent genes. If you only have one of the alleles, you can only do it with raw or getting the sort of the enzymes, the lactase enzyme in a capsule, and using that with your milk consumption. That's your only other option. If you can't get raw milk, that's a problem. There are other source of raw dairy, like cheese and stuff like that, especially the French cheeses, some of the Italian cheese and stuff like that. Yeah, it is. Look, I know it's hard. It's not easy. Okay, so Sarah's saying, I've been using MCT because I can't get cream without. Okay. Look, I think going for if you look, if it works for you, I'm not against it, but the issue is that for some people it just doesn't work. It just really, it depends where you are, what underlying issues you've got with your own sort of health and stuff like that. Yeah, that's true. I call anything bad rancid. I call anything bad rancid. Ella, laugh out loud. Maybe that's not the right word. Well, for coconut, no, it's not. Sort of rancid is when something gets a sort of a smell. It sort of is off, is sort of oxidized. It's like people say about lipid, that your mitochondrial burn. They don't burn, they oxidize, things. So there's a lot of people that use inappropriate sort of words and all that. You see them all the time. Even doctors, they go, your mitochondria burning sugar or burning fat. They don't burn, they oxidize, but people always, sometimes we get into a habit. Even I do it sometimes. I slip up and go, ugh. Yep, that's it. Oh, that was smart. Just overshot. When I just looked up, answered wrong according to, yep, spelling unpleasant. Yep. It's a comment. You should try fish roe. It depends on the source. You know, that's really important. I usually try and buy fresh fish or get access to it from down the waterfront when the fishermen come in. So the fish are pretty fresh. And so any eggs that are in there, you know, fish eggs, yeah, they're really nice. So it definitely isn't. It's a piss poor. It's ALA. If you're a poor converter, I mean, I'm a good converter for both LA and ALA. I've got the genetics, the best genetics for conversion. But most Northern Europeans don't. So not a good idea. It's probably because my ancestors consumed nuts and stuff like that, far more seeds in that regard. That's the only reason. I've probably ended up with some redeeming genetics. Fortunate to be able to score top farmers Dutch raw cheese at market. Good. It's just a bit too yummy. I could just put away. Yeah, that's the problem. 200 grams of. Yeah, I tend to have to control my intake as well. I know what you mean. You know, so yeah, it's hard to control. I consume raw dairy because we can get raw dairy in Australia. It's a certain brand. What they do is they bottle it and then they put it into a machine and they put under pressure, which breaks the membrane of the bacteria, but it keeps intact everything else, including the enzymes and all that. So it's raw without the bacteria, basically. So it's better than the other method that is used elsewhere, where they run it through like a chilling process, and I think that's too processed in that regard. So this is the best next thing in terms of that. And look, most of the European cheeses are fantastic because there's a lot of raw stuff, and that's what I buy, a lot of the European cheeses in that regard. Yep. Anyway, guys, since there's no more questions, is there any last minute questions? Because it's about 12:30 and I would like to get to bed. So if there are any last minute questions, because we're 3 minutes away from 2 hours, and I'll probably stop it at 2 hours. So any really just related to coronavirus, nothing else. You know, there's a live feed tomorrow. Sunday, Australian time, Eastern, in about 12:30. So you can check and you'll actually see the times for all the other sort of stuff. But yeah. But then again, you're just getting macros. You're not, you know, it's not going to kill you, but you're just getting macros. And if you don't have the lactase genes, you just basically, it's going to be less, let's say, more problematic. But remember, all food, basically, you know, oxidation of molecules of food cause some level of inflammation. You know, it's very low grade, but it happens. So there is no zero inflammation without oxidizing foods. So that's just nonsense, you know. So, you know, that's why you need some level of fasting and cyclical. So to basically clear out all the gunk and all that sort of stuff. If you know, so those are the sort of things to focus on. within your life, that you don't put too much junk or things that basically cause damage. We're all going to cheat here and there. My sort of cheat now and then on Saturdays is occasionally having ice cream. Yes, it's dairy based. It's cleaner than some of the other crap, but at the end of the day, it still has a bit of sugar in it. But it is summer at the moment, and I can deplete some of those neutrons, so it's not as problematic. Good night, Sarah. Coronavirus is a large concern on cities constantly overcast. Yeah, look, if people have a low vitamin D status, yeah, there's going to be a problem for those populations, because a lot of people are not aware of the importance of vitamin D, and even doctors don't discuss it with their patients. It's that's what I find quite disturbing. Yeah, that's one of the biggest problems, that not a lot of people understand the importance of vitamin D. So you guys are sort of now are aware of this. You've seen, some of the science that I've shown you and how important it is for, also just think of it. Your T cells are coated with vitamin D3 receptors. What do you think they want to be activated and work? They need vitamin D. This is why most colds and flus and all that happen in winter, when our vitamin D stores and levels are much lower. So vitamin D is very important, guys. It's involved in well over 1,000 types of enzymatic processes in the body. So, it's critical that we have good vitamin D status. And if you're going to check your vitamin D status, the 125, the sort of the active form is the more important one, because it's activated by the kidneys. So it's really important to know. And if you've got an underlying kidney problem, that can be an issue as well. Then you may have to consider supplemental. And if you've got a gut problem, this is another issue that I forgot I should have brought up. You should consider a liposomal form. So let me just give you a sec, because these are important, because some people are going to have gut issues and malabsorption issues because they can't absorb fat-soluble vitamins effectively because they've got some gut issues, underlying issues and all that. And a liposomal form or an injectable form is a critical. The problem is that with the injectable form, you know what they use primarily? D2, the plant-based crap. That's not good, because if you don't have the capacity to the genetics to convert easily, not going to work. So liposomal is the type. It's also it's like it's 25 nanometers, so it's very small. The actual sort of the lipid encapsulation. So it's very small, and that means that it can actually get through the blood-brain barrier and all that. Because if it's over 100, it's shit. It's useless. If it's below 80, yeah, 50 or below is best. So, and this brand actually, theirs is, and that's it, their liposomal is 25. Took a while to actually reply back to me, but I spoke with one of their people. And look, guys, you know me, I get nothing. I'm not sponsored by anyone. I don't get anything from anyone. I have a day job, but this, Sarah, that actually, the British lady that spoke to Bart, she was the one that really got me, Bart, and quite a few other people onto these liposomal forms, and then I sort of investigated it myself. So it's, let me just share the screen. That's the brand there, Aurora Nutrascience, and this is their microliposomal. So it's around 25 nanometers, but that's fine. Anything 50 or below is perfect. So, there's, in any, you get a U-type, in any production run, there's going to be slightly, the size. It depends on the manufacturing process and stuff like that. So that's the one that I would recommend for people that have got malabsorption issues, that have got underlying issues that have a problem with getting it into their body. So, and also phosphatidylcholine, which is really good as well. So that's actually included. There's also ascorbic acid. And the nice thing about this, the ascorbic acid isn't very high. It's not, a ridiculous high amount. It's just so, so that can be a value without creating a whole lot of oxalate. When it's, excessive, that's ridiculous. So, yeah. So it's pretty clean. The serving is a pretty good dose in that regard as well, and it's more bioavailable, because when you're taking, orally, like 10,000 IU's, you're going to end up getting, around about a quarter of that. So this gives you slightly more, and it gets past the gut, both the gut barrier and also through the actual blood-brain barrier as well. So it's one of the better ones to utilize. So I'll drop there, and very good. Good idea as well, mate. Thank you. Okay, so you had some I had a real bad reaction to supplementing vitamin D, then found health expert to say that toxic. No, no, vitamin D isn't toxic. You may, sometimes what may happen is, if you don't have, remember, the fat soluble vitamins work together. So retinol, MK4, and also, so they actually work together. And let me just find the MK4 one. I was using this. This is a sort of a very expensive. This is basically for my decalcification. As you know, I've been reversing my cardiovascular issues and my calcification since I had my operation on my heart. So this was the brand that I was using, which is a MK4 minoquinone. There is another one on this, which is slightly cheaper and has a higher dose. I was, because of for cardiovascular reasons, I was basically working it slowly, because at the time I had the delusion that it could be an issue. But since then, I've learned that there are certain pathways that basically prevent unstable plaque being formed. So, I could have gone for the larger version and got better results quicker. So, yeah, you live and learn. There's a lot of misinformation out there, unfortunately. So I think this is the the higher dose they've got. Yeah, there's the 15, which is 3 times the amount of minoquinone 4. But it is a hell of a lot more pricier. In regards, there's the one my sister's taking. Does also help with, your skin and all that, tightening it up and all that. So it's part of that sort of things, sort of that. Low dose type B, nicotinic acid, which sort of gives you a hot flush and all that. It's sort of the way I reduced my wrinkles in the last decade as well. But I did it for my cardiovascular health. It just wasn't accidentally a side effect, a good side effect in that regard. Yes. So sometimes we just stumble on things, pretty much. Yep. Look, unfortunately, we don't earth ourselves, and we don't walk in the sun, and that's the problem. Hello, good to see you, Mandy. Yeah, it's just some of that unfortunate. Check out the work of Dr. Garrett Smith. He says vitamin D and vitamin A are both toxic. He's an idiot. He's absolutely idiotic if he's saying that. He's got no idea, Excessive amounts and out of balance, as I said, if you take vitamins like fat-soluble vitamins and things you create, this is why I say get it from the food rather than from a supplement, because you can create imbalances. If he's saying that, yep, I agree with that. But if he's basically saying that they are toxic, then he's a complete and utter charlatan and an idiot. Retinol is fundamental to to the regulation of collagen degrading enzymes. If you don't have enough, you wrinkle like shit. 1, 2, you basically actually have your endothelial layers will become less problematic. They will degrade. They'll break down. You'll get low grade scurvy. These are important, these fat-soluble vitamins. They regulate this sort of stuff. So if he's saying that they are toxic in any amount, God, don't listen to him. He'll friggin' kill you. That's just crazy. Over 1,000 enzymatic processes vitamin D is involved in. How can it be toxic? God almighty. Are there people saying this shit? May have had up to 10 times more. Yeah. Look, if you're out in the sun continuously, because we're midday persistent hunters, because the cats can't, they can't sweat. Because the big cats can't sweat, we had to go out in midday. So, we got quite a bit of vitamin D. We've evolved with it. Evolutionary. It goes against evolution to say that it's toxic. And he's a doctor? God almighty. Is he crazy? If he's saying that these things are toxic, because it goes against all science as we know it, the best science. Anyway, great speaking to you guys. Good night, and I better get to bed.